Hey now, 580 Sports Talk going up on a Tuesday. Brendan Dworzinski and Dan Lucero here with you for the next 2 hours on this Tuesday edition of 580 Sports Talk. Thank you so much for swinging by on our first show of the week, a short week because of a long weekend for the President's Day holiday. Hope you had a nice long weekend if you got to take Monday off. And if not, well, thank you for joining us anyway for our first show of the week. Do you have a favorite president you celebrated yesterday?
William Henry Harrison. He died in 30 days. He went super hard at work and then keeled over 30 days in.
We had a big life-size fat head of James Buchanan put up in our apartment. Love the Buchanan administration.
Also, a big shout out to Calvin Coolidge, not for anything he did while president. He was, in fact, quite bad when it came to being president. The Depression is essentially Coolidge's fault. But big shout out to Silent Cal for the time a woman came up to him at a banquet and said, "I bet I can get you to say more than 2 words." And he said, "You lose."
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
That's about the peak of the Calvin Coolidge years for our country. Things didn't go so well. But we appreciate you joining us the day after President's Day for a full but short edition of 580 Sports Talk. Again, just 2 hours of the show today because K-State is on early tonight. Early tip at Bramlage Coliseum tonight. 6 o'clock tip as K-State takes on Baylor. A massive game for both programs. If Baylor wants even a sliver of a chance to still win a share of the Big 12 championship, they're likely going to have to win tonight. K-State would love to get some positive momentum and help their seeding situation as well come NCAA tournament time and possibly Big 12 tournament time as well. So that game is coming up at 6 o'clock tonight, which means pregame begins at 5. That is when we are out of here coming up today. Dan will be covering the game at Bramlage Coliseum, so make sure you're following us on Twitter at SportsOn580W, at SportsOn580, and follow our YouTube channel, Sports on 580 WIBW. That's where you'll see Dan's post-game recap show as well. And of course, that's where you can be streaming 580 Sports Talk right now as well. Again, our YouTube channel, Sports on 580 WIBW. Go subscribe if you have not yet. Perfect time to, so you will be ready whenever Dan goes live following the K-State game with Baylor tonight and Jerome Tang's post-game press conference. We will talk plenty of college basketball coming up here to lead off the show in just a moment. A lot of KU to get to specifically. We'll touch on K-State's win over Iowa State as well. KU, though, incredible game against Baylor on Saturday, and then a big win last night as well in an ugly game. There's no getting around that. It was a very ugly basketball game, but KU picks up a win, is in a great position to, again, win at least a share of the Big 12 championship. They are in a great spot going into the final couple weeks of the Big 12 season. So we will talk all about that. We'll also be joined in the 4 o'clock hour today by Michael Swain of Fog.net and 24/7 Sports for our 23rd Street Brewery Jayhawk Weekly. Also coming up, we'll talk some NFL today. Matt Verderame is going to join us today at 3:35. Yesterday, no show. He was kind enough to be flexible with us and move to today. And we'll also talk about Orlando Brown a little bit because he is probably the number one biggest personnel question mark for the Chiefs going into this offseason. The franchise tag valuations came out for 2023. What does that mean for Orlando Brown? Are they going to keep him? Are they going to tag him? Are they going to trade him on the tag? We'll talk about that, plus some other franchise tag candidates this year, including a couple quarterbacks who are going to impact a couple of playoff teams in their respective conferences. We've still got What Is Wrong With You. We'll recap the long weekend with the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's all coming up in the next 2 hours right here on 580 Sports Talk. And again, as always, you're welcome to chime in on the show on the Big O Tires text line. 785-272-9429 is the text line number. And you can watch us on YouTube. Sports on 580 WIBW is the channel. Hop on in. Comment section popping off already. The usuals have jumped in for some Tuesday afternoon fun. We would love for you to chime in as well over on YouTube. But let's get into the college hoops from the weekend, Dan. And we will start with the Kansas Jayhawks, who I think it is fair to say, and I don't feel biased saying this because I've seen it from KU fans, from non-KU fans, from national media folks. There is an argument right now that the Kansas Jayhawks are the best team in the country, at least at this moment in college basketball. They have 14 quad one wins. And for those who have maybe heard that phrase but don't exactly know what it means, That's the best wins you can get. It's against top 50 opponents at home, top 75 opponents from all of Division I on the road, and there's a neutral component there as well. They've had a lot of really hard games, home and away, and they have won more of them than any other team in the country. The second most quad one wins entering today, Purdue. A lot of people think they might be the number one overall seed in the tournament, pretty much a universal pick to be a 1 seed overall right now. National Player of the Year, Zach Edey. They have 9 quad one wins. That is 5 fewer than KU. In fact, how about this for a point of historical perspective? This is, since they instituted the quad system, the net, a couple of years ago, this is the most ever before the start of the NCAA tournament for a team, 14. And guess what? KU's got multiple games left.
Yeah, multiple opportunities to win quad one games left.
Yeah, they get West Virginia at home, they get Texas Tech at home, and then Texas, which is on the road. You bet that's a quad one game. So many more opportunities for good wins for this KU team, and they're playing their best basketball of the season right now. They have, I don't want to say figured it all out, because I think you watch a game like that last night where the offense was gross, and Jalen Wilson did not have a good game. He even had a couple looks that just wouldn't go down. He was upset with some of the contact throughout the game, both with himself for not making shots and also not getting some foul calls. You would love to see at least a little bit more from your offense. But defensively, KU is locked in. They have gotten contributions from a bunch of guys who aren't just Jalen Wilson. And you now have back-to-back wins to put yourself in, again, a great position to win at least a share of the Big 12 championship. And, I mean, why, at this point, knowing what we know about this KU team and the pieces that are on it and its head coach and the battles they have won and waged during Big 12 season, I mean, why wouldn't you say, yeah, this team should be the number one overall at this point? Like, Alabama's been really good this year. They also have a couple bad losses. They also might, maybe at some point, lose their best player because he might have been an accessory to a murder. Who knows?
Yeah, that's not something a lot of other programs are dealing with right now.
No. Major Dave Bliss vibes coming from T-Town this week. Purdue, certainly beatable. They've got the National Player of the Year in Zach Edey. You know what else they don't have? A single competent guard. Their guard play is so bad.
I don't know how much of them you've watched. I was talking about this when I went on with Jake and Fulton earlier, and I was harsh there, like over the top. But I watched them play Ohio State on Sunday afternoon, and it is Zach Edey and the Pips, man. That is an unstoppable force and a whole lot of movable objects out there on the wing who are not spectacular shooters. Like, I almost think the plan against Purdue is just let Edey get his 35 and 15 and figure out how to stop all the other guys, because the other guys are stoppable.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny because you think of a team like Purdue that in recent years has had some incredible guards. Jaden Ivey last year was awesome. We remember Carson Edwards a few years ago, who was awesome. That was the COVID year, right? When he really blew up, or was it the year before? I actually don't remember, but he was awesome for Purdue. Whichever year it was, he blew up in the tournament. They've got nobody outside of Zach Edey. They're beatable. Houston, really good. The metrics love Houston. Have for a couple years now. The American Athletic Conference, not a great basketball league.
Not preparing you for the tournament in the same way that the Big 12 does. Not the night in, night out gauntlet that the Big 12 offers. Like, you can't convince me that there's a better team in the country right now than the Kansas Jayhawks on current form. You can't.
No. And when you're getting so many guys who are making plays for you consistently, like right now, I think it's entirely fair to say, and he didn't score a ton last night, but I think it's pretty fair to say KJ Adams is playing pretty well right now. Maybe not his best ball of the year, but he's playing very well. He's the 5th best player in the starting lineup for KU right now. You've got a surefire first-team All-American, the likely Big 12 player of the year. You've got Grady Dick, who, when he is on, is almost unstoppable. When he was hot in that first half, 1, he carried KU last night. But 2, he is just such a good shot maker. He's creative. He's got an incredibly high basketball IQ, and he at least tries defensively. He might not be great at it. I saw someone tweet last night that he might lead the nation in number of fouls committed that give up and won plays. But there's effort there defensively, which is more than you could say at the start of the season. Juwan Harris is special. I mean, he is truly, truly special. And the trend continued this weekend where as long as he scores more than 3 points, KU is undefeated this year.
Yeah. I think they've got like 32 wins in a row in total when he scores more than 3 points.
It's absurd.
Like that was, I think he only finished with 4 last night or maybe 6.
Yeah, he got 6.
It was 6. He had that game on a string. I mean, he had that game in his command. It was a terrific point guard game from him. And that's him being great without scoring. That's him dictating pace and dictating tempo and dictating the offense and dictating the terms of the game. He doesn't need to score 15 points to do that. Now, when he does, forget about it. Lights out. Because if he's giving you 15 and then you're getting the usual 15 from Grady Dick and 20 from Jalen Wilson, and forget about it. I don't know how you score enough to keep up with the team that's that good on the defensive end. But I think he showed last night how much he can impact the game even when he is not scoring. I thought he played a superb game.
And KU, by the way, speaking of their defensive quality, now in the top 10 in the Ken Pom numbers after last night's win. And the other guy from the starting lineup we have not mentioned yet, because you could throw in some of the bench guys too. I thought last night Ernest Uday looked really good. Yeah. He has insanely fast hands for a big man.
Yeah,
you don't see big dudes reach out for steals and corral them to the degree that Ernest Uday usually does. Kevin McCullough has been incredible in the last 3 games. We heard CJ Moore say it last Thursday that he was really hoping that McCullough would be okay for the Baylor game because he was awesome against Oklahoma State, but then rolled his ankle. He comes out, he and Juwan Harris play. Give me your favorite defensive player in any sport. Darrelle Revis locking down a wide receiver in the NFL. You give me Gary Payton in the NBA. That's what those 2 guys looked like in that game against Baylor in the second half. Bill Self said, all right, forget the switches. Do not leave those guys. Do not leave Keontae George. Do not leave Adam Flagler. KU had a plus 29 margin in the second half of their game against Baylor this weekend. Plus 29 against a top team in the country, a top 10 team in the nation. Just unbelievable work by them defensively. And then McCullough again last night was incredible. Came up with big play after big play. He blocked a 3-pointer. He had multiple blocks at the rim at the end of the game. He had that tie-up that was acrobatic and sensational the whole way. When he is locked in, I mean, when any of these guys are locked in together, this team becomes that much better. But when they're all making shots and when they are defending at the level at which they are defending right now, specifically Harris and McCullough, I don't think anybody can beat this team. Now, you have to actually get that level of play in a 40-minute sample. We've seen that a couple games in a row now, and KU looks better than anybody I've seen all year.
Most teams, if they're going to win a game, it has to be on their terms. Like TCU is kind of a team that if they're going to win, they have to be running and gunning, and they have to be creating turnovers, scoring off of misses, scoring in transition. They're awesome. They're a sight to behold when they get out in transition. But when you only turn it over 11 times and you're a good transition defense team like Kansas is, that makes it really hard for TCU to score because they can't really shoot it. And right now, Eddie Lampkin, God bless him, is given everything he can give for TCU right now. But it's not much because he still is on one leg and he doesn't have the same lift and explosiveness around the basket. So that's their biggest interior post threat to score. And he can't really score and they can't really shoot. So TCU is a team that has to win games a certain way. Iowa State is a team that has to win a certain way. Baylor this year has been a team that they have to win a certain way. They have to win. The threes have to be falling, has to be a high scoring game because they haven't been very good on the defensive end. KU has just shown us in their last 2 games against excellent teams that they can win no matter what the game looks like, that they can dictate the terms. If it's going to be up and down, if it's going to be high scoring, it's going to be a 3-point contest, or if it's going to be low scoring, if it's going to be gritty, if you're going to have to go get it out of the mud. Kansas has shown that they can do both of those things, and that's what championship caliber teams are made of. And they have shown that mettle, and it's remarkable that they've done it because, I mean, not a lot of these guys played big minutes for last year's team. Seth Davis did a piece on this for The Athletic, talking about the last 2 teams to repeat as champions in college basketball. Like Florida didn't lose anybody, right? They had that whole starting lineup where 4 of the 5 starters, those were the big time players for 2 straight years. It's the same thing for Duke when they repeated in 91-92. They had, Hurley and Leitner and Hill and all those guys. All their production was the same in 91 and 92. For Kansas, Wilson was like fourth banana on last year's team, maybe third. And then DeJuan Harris is the point guard. And then all these other guys either weren't on the team or didn't play significant minutes. Like you'd see KJ Adams here and there, but this is a new team.
No, last year, KJ was the plug and play, we need to stop guy. He was on the court for the final play of the national championship game after having played, a minute at the end of the first half. And he did the same thing against Miami in the Elite Eight. He didn't play in the whole tournament. He might have played in the opener, but Texas Southern doesn't really count against the 16 seed.
Right.
Kevin McCullough has been in big games, plenty of big games, but not with this team.
No, new teammates, new system. A lot of things are new for Kevin McCullough. And I think it took him a little bit of time. I think he struggled a little bit early in Big 12 play, but he is starting to, I think, understand his role better and really starting to fit in and be kind of that glue guy that I think Bill Self probably envisioned when he brought him into the program.
There is a reason that Bill Self said at Media Day, before the year even started, he said at Media Day in Kansas City, when they heard Kevin McCullough was going to be in the transfer portal, he instantly thought, we need that guy. He is the perfect fit for this team. The last 3 games, that has come to fruition. Even though he's not shooting well, and I actually thought his shooting was worse from 3 this year than in the past. He's actually always been about a 28% three-point shooter.
Yeah, he has.
Although it's been especially bad as of late. But man, the defensive effort, the fact that he is doing a better job around the rim, although he did leave a couple really short last night, but no one was making shots last night. Just incredibly impressive.
Didn't Bill Self compare him to Marcus Garrett in the postgame?
I did not catch that. No, but he might have.
Yeah, Bill Self invoked Marcus Garrett, and you do not do that lightly. And I know Bill Self doesn't do that lightly when you're talking about defensive players.
No, Marcus Garrett is on a pedestal for Bill Self, maybe more than anyone else he has ever coached. And we remember how good he was defensively. And to put that it's almost pressure. Like, oh my God, I got to live up to Bill Self's favorite player of his entire career. That's a lot to live up to. But
this was the quote. This was from. It was actually on the postgame radio show.
Okay.
He was talking with Gurley, and he said he was talking about McCullough, and his quote was, "That's a bad man right there. I didn't know if I'd ever coach somebody with a defensive IQ like Marcus, but he's got it."
That's outrageous, man. That is incredible. I get it. I see where he's coming from, and he is smart. He defensively always makes the right play. Always makes the right play. And that's what makes having him and Harris, and McCullough's a better defender, but Harris is very good, as 2 guys who can handle their own against anybody on the ball. That's valuable for March, because you know what wins in March? What do we always say wins in March? Guard play. All right, McCullough, you take the 1. DeJuan, you take the 2. Or most important, second most important. Or DeJuan, you're on the point guard. Kevin, you're on the wing. Whoever is going to score. I don't know of many lineups that are that good defensively 1-2 as KU has on the perimeter. By the way, we'll mention K-State here real quick. The game on Saturday against Baylor, I've been to a lot of KU basketball games. I've covered a lot. I've covered 90+% of KU's home games since 2013, and I've watched all of them for years and years and years. I'm not sure I've ever seen a more remarkable game than that one. There have been big comebacks. There have been great Allen Fieldhouse crowds. But Baylor looked like freaking the best team in America. I don't even know what the comparison would be in the first half. They could not miss. KU looked awful. In the second half, it was the complete flip script. Like, KU went 1 of 11 from 3 in the first half. Baylor went 1 of 11 from 3 in the second half.
Yeah.
There was a 33-point swing in that game.
Yeah, remarkable.
And it could have been worse. KU could have poured on more in the second half.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable. We should mention K-State, though, because they got a big win this weekend, too.
They did. They
needed it.
Yes, they got a win they had to have. And they had to dig that one out of the dirt, too, because the offense really hasn't been going for K-State here these last couple of weeks. And a big part of that is Marquise Noel hasn't been shooting as proficiently as he was early in the Big 12 season. And he had 2 points and missed all his shots from the field in the first half in a game where K-State was down by 8 at the intermission. But it just felt like that game could turn if K-State could only put the ball through the basket. And then Noel came out and hit 3 threes before the first TV timeout. And it completely flipped the energy and it flipped the game. That's how important Marquise Noel is. He's the leader. He's the energy. He's the spark. And when he got rolling, it got his teammates rolling, and they were terrific in the second half. Really good defensively. Now, Iowa State, they're not a great shooting team, even with Caleb Grill. They didn't have Grill on Saturday, so they were terrible from the field. They were no threat from behind the arc. But K-State's defensive energy increased in the second half. They found their legs. That has been a big issue, I think, for Kansas State in that stretch where they had struggled, was it felt like they just weren't as energetic, didn't have as much life in the second half of games. And that was really the problem in Norman a week ago. But they found their legs. They found their energy in the second half against Iowa State, and they dragged it over the line for a great finish. And they played composed. Like, Iowa State is a team that will turn you over if you're not careful. And K-State did a really good job taking care of the ball. They got good shots. They didn't make them all. Neither team shot it well in that game. But their energy level and effort level in the second half was what it needs to be to win games in this league. And they found that, and they needed to find it, and they did on Saturday.
We talk about it with KU that they needed to find ways to win games where Jalen Wilson didn't have to be a 30-plus point scorer. They needed other guys to contribute. I think you can make a similar, if not exact, parallel with K-State, because we bemoaned that a little bit while they've really been slumping the last couple weeks, that, hey, a lot of that is because Marquise Noel no longer looks like a first-team All-American, is that he's just not shooting as well. It's the rigors of the Big 12 schedule. You get worn down. You get defended differently over time in a league that has the best coaches in all of America. So to win games against good opponents, whether you're home or away, doesn't really matter when it's a Big 12 game. To find ways to win when that guy is not shooting especially efficiently, that's a big deal. I thought Keontae Johnson was pretty good in the game, was a little bit more involved offensively than that he was in the game mid last week. Overall, not anything too bold of me, I think, when it comes to the thoughts on the K-State win. I mean, they needed it badly. It was still not a pretty game. I still think there's a much better game that K-State can play. It almost doesn't feel right to call the game tonight a test for K-State. I mean, Baylor could be a Final Four team. I was texting a buddy of mine during the first half of the KU-Baylor game, and I said, hey, I thought of this before this game started and Baylor went up by a bunch, but I think this might be a Final Four team. With those guards, that might be a Final Four team.
I agree.
And that is going to be a big challenge for K-State. Can they win tonight? Absolutely they can win. They certainly can. They've won tough games before. They've beaten Baylor already this year. A different Baylor team, but still, they've beaten them this year. They've beaten a good Texas team this year. But if they really want to, so to speak, kick it into high gear before we get into tournament play, before we get to the Big 12 tournament, obviously the NCAA tournament, a good showing tonight, I think, would go a long way for that.
I think would lock in a top 3 seed for them in the NCAA tournament. I think you would think that they'd be pretty safe as a top 3 because, the NCAA committee put their preliminary seedings out Saturday morning, and K-State was a 3.
I was surprised by that. I thought they'd be a 4.
And then they beat Iowa State, who the committee considered a 3. So if you can go and protect your home court and beat Baylor tonight, I think that locks them in there. I think that puts them in a solid 3 seed, goes a long way toward confirming that you're not going to be that really good team that has to play in the pigtail games of the Big 12 tournament in 2 Wednesdays. So, this is an important one. It's not going to be because their run-in is not as harsh as some of the other teams in the league. So this is not the end of the world if they don't get this game, but at home, they've got a great chance to do it. They have just got to find their offense. It clicked in a little bit in the second half of Iowa State. They've got to find their offense tonight. This is a team that being Baylor, not great defensively. They can do it.
You know who's got a freaking brutal end of the Big 12 schedule? Texas.
Yes.
They've got Iowa State at home tonight, Baylor on the road next week, TCU on the road after that, and then they finish the year March 4th at home against Kansas. That is gruesome for Texas. Holy cow. We'll talk more college basketball later on, specifically KU with Michael Swain of Fog.net. Tim Fitzgerald of Go Power Cat, he'll join us coming up tomorrow to recap tonight's K-State game. We'll talk to Matt Verderame also later on this hour about all things NFL. But first, we'll get to a quick timeout, come back, recap the holiday weekend with the good, the bad, and the ugly here on 580 Sports Talk. A quick round of the good, the bad, and the ugly from a holiday weekend before we get to Matt Verderame here on 580 Sports Talk. The good for me, other than KU looking freaking awesome over the last couple of days, you know what had a great weekend? Not me gambling. No, it was the XFL. The return of the XFL. It was entertaining. Battlehawks scored 15 points in a minute 29, I believe it was, at the end of the game. The first game on Sunday. There was some good play on Saturday. Final game Sunday night was kind of ugly. Ben DiNucci could not play for I wouldn't let him play Madden at quarterback. He is just abysmal. But no, it was a good first weekend for another spring football league that we were robbed of back in 2020. And I'm not looking for great football, but I'm looking for something that's entertaining and at least looks like football, and that's what they did.
Hey, as long as you got that, who can complain, right? My good for the weekend, I enjoyed the Genesis Invitational a great deal. It was great to see. It's a cool course, the Riviera Country Club. Great tournament, great leaderboard. The elevated events the PGA Tour is doing are really paying off with some really high-level golf at these elevated events and great leaderboards. John Rahm, the winner, he's the best golfer in the world. Just in general, all things being equal, I would pick him to be his best is better than anyone else's best, I think, on the tour. Gary Woodland with a top 10 finish.
Yeah.
Came in tied for ninth, going 9 under par, 8 shots off the lead. Hopefully that sparks G-Dub here in 2023. And the big cat, Tiger Woods, was out on the course, shot 1 under for the tournament. Had a couple of rounds in the 60s to show he's still got it. Had a couple rounds in the 70s to show that he's not going to have it probably every day of a 4-day tournament ever again. But it was still fun to see the golf. I enjoyed the golf a lot this weekend. That's my good.
My bad was Max Duggan, the Davey O'Brien Award winner for TCU. Incredible season. Love Max Duggan. We've talked so highly of him all year. He showed up after the Davey O'Brien ceremony last night at TCU. Davey O'Brien, of course, played there. Max Duggan played there too. Showed up at Schulmeyer Arena to watch the end of the TCU-Kansas game. TCU did not hit a field goal after Max Duggan entered the building.
No.
Not great. A lot of jokes out there about national champions in TCU football.
Yeah, Duggan showed up, the national champs, immediately scored 6. That was the one I saw on Twitter last night. That was my favorite. Because that's what happened. It was a 1-point game when Duggan entered the building, and then blink of an eye, it was KU by 7.
Yeah, not a great night for Max Duggan. That place was fired up for him, though.
Oh, yeah, they were. I was like, what is going on? Is somebody running out onto the court? Then the camera showed us. Okay, that makes sense.
When I saw a guy in a tux, I thought it was a streaker. I thought they were cheering a streaker. No, it was Max Duggan.
I appreciate that Duggan put on one of the Funky Town t-shirts.
Yeah.
Apparently his date too good for that.
Yeah.
Wanted you to see how good she looked in her black cocktail dress. Wouldn't put on a Funky Town t-shirt.
Lame. Certifiably not funky.
Right? You know who did put on a Funky Town t-shirt? Grady Dick. After the game.
We'll get to that with Michael Swain coming up in Jayhawk Weekly.
Loved that. My bad for the weekend. Coaches at all levels, please do not auto bench your players when they get 2 first-half fouls. Do not do it, because cautionary tale number 1, Caleb Boone for Oklahoma State got 2 fouls in 2.5 minutes for the Pokes at West Virginia. The next time he stepped on the court, because Mike Boynton didn't put him in the rest of the first half, next time Caleb Boone saw floor time, his team was down by 19 points. The game was over at that point. So don't auto bench your guys. Just learn from mistakes. Because you know who doesn't do that? Bill Self. Bill Self didn't auto bench Jalen Wilson and Grady Dick.
No, they came back in with 6 minutes left in the first half.
Yeah. And KU went into the locker room with the lead thanks to that decision.
Yeah.
So don't auto bench your guys with 2 fouls.
Remember when Bruce Weber benched Barry Brown for way too long and it cost K-State a tournament game?
Yeah, they lost to UC Irvine. Oh, yeah. Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Real quick, because we have to get to a commercial break here. My ugly, Nate Oates, incredible basketball coach, potentially a gigantic moron. His best player, Brandon Miller, may have supplied a gun that was used in a murder in Tuscaloosa earlier this winter. And then Nate Oates, when asked about it, pretty much said, yeah, boys will be boys, and I can't control what happens outside of practice. This is the same guy who, after that murder, committed by a former player of his, talked to Ray Lewis about talking to his team about the situation.
Hey, he's an expert in that situation, but not in the way you want.
Come on, Nate Oates. Any uglies for you?
No, that's about as bad as it gets.
That'll bring us to a quick timeout. Matt Verderame joins us next on 580 Sports Talk. Matt Verderame joins us on 580 Sports Talk, national NFL writer for Fansided.com. That's where you can find all of his tremendous work covering the NFL. Joining us one day later than normal because of the President's Day holiday yesterday. Make sure you're following him on Twitter, by the way, at Matt Verderame. Matt, how have you enjoyed the first week post-football season?
I feel like it's still very much football season. I've been writing, getting ready for free agency and the franchise tag and the draft, and heading out to Indy next week. But that all said, I'm enjoying it. I think this time of year in a lot of ways is more crazy than the actual season as far as content goes. But it's crazy and it's fun, and that is exemplified by one of the biggest players in this whole thing being in the darkness retreat at the moment. So that's where we are.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that my favorite team's quarterback, who I've invested a lot of emotional energy in for the last nearly 20 years, has decided that instead of talking about this publicly, he will sit in a dark closet for a few days. But that is something we can get to here in a few minutes. I did want to touch on first, Matt, some news from last week. Eric Bieniemy is no longer the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. We discussed that at length here on this program when it was announced last week. And look, I think Eric Bieniemy should be an NFL head coach at this point. A lot of guys who have far worse resumes did not, or, they have gotten opportunities where he has not. From a football perspective, because there is obviously a major elephant in the room when it comes to why Eric Bieniemy in particular has not gotten opportunities. But from a football perspective, is there any argument at all, or even, frankly, not even football, but from a non-race perspective, is there any argument at all that is legitimate as to why he has not gotten through to a head coaching job yet?
No, I think it's a hard conversation because I think a lot of it is based on, whenever you hear about Eric Bieniemy and his quest to be a head coach, it always seems to be a conversation that ends up being about race. Which I think there's a lot of merit to. And I think it also goes down to, he doesn't interview well. Now, people are different. Some people are going to like Eric Bieniemy's style, which obviously, for anyone who's a Chiefs fan knows, is very blunt, to the point, and he's more of an aggressive, take-charge personality. Some people are going to love that about him. Some people aren't. So for some teams, I'm sure he doesn't interview well because he's not the kind of guy who an owner is going to be able to just sit back and control and say, hey, look, I want you to do this, and you're going to listen to me. Eric Bieniemy is certainly his own man, he has his own thoughts, and I think that's a really good quality in a head coach, but that scares some owners. I think there's also a little bit of, well, listen, how much did he really do in Kansas City with that offense? It's Andy Reid, it's Mahomes. My pushback on that would be, Doug Peterson and Matt Nagy both got head coaching jobs in the exact same position with the exact same amount of influence as Eric Bieniemy. Now, they didn't have Mahomes as their starting quarterbacks, fine, but those offenses weren't as successful as the ones that Bieniemy oversaw. So I think it's incredibly unfair he hasn't been given an opportunity. I think he clearly left for this Washington job because he knows he's got to prove that he can do it without Andy Reid there, without Mahomes there. I think that's insane that he has to be put in that position, but I think that's pretty obvious that that's what's happened.
Do you think that he can get it done with Sam Howell? I mean, if you're Washington, you've got to feel like you won the lottery here. I mean, you've got a really good offensive coordinator who's coming in and is hopefully going to usher in the, they don't even need a franchise quarterback. They just need a competent quarterback for more than one season in Washington. Yeah. I have to imagine they feel great. Do you think he can get it done with Sam Howell?
I don't know, because we saw Sam Howell for one game.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Howell was a day 3 pick for a reason. I'm not one of these people who's going to watch a guy play 4 quarters and just have a sweeping judgment one way or the other. Teams are going to game plan for Sam Howell. Teams are going to try to take things away from him. I mean, look, I think it's an uphill battle again. I mean, because I think it's an uphill battle for anybody with Sam Howell because he's a 5th-round pick, and there's a reason he's a 5th-round pick. My fear for Bieniemy is that the Chiefs are going to be the Chiefs next year, and they're going to score 30 points a game. And Washington's going to struggle offensively because, let's be real about it. I mean, again, they are not the most talented offensive team, and they're in a division with a very good defensive team in Philly, a very good defensive team in Dallas, and a defensive team in New York that's decent. I think is only going to get better. And so my concern is at the end of the year, Washington's going to rank like 22nd on offense, and the Chiefs will be first. And all these people who have detracted from the enemy for years are going to go, see, he wasn't the reason they were good. Now look at what he's done when he's on his own. I think it's wholly unfair, but I don't think there's a whole lot of nuance sometimes with analysis with people in the NFL. And I think that's how it's going to be looked upon. So can he succeed? Yeah. I mean, I think he's got the chops to do it. I don't know if he's got the talent around him to do it.
Our guest is Matt Verderame from Fansided, covers the National Football League, including the Stacking the Box column and Stacking the Box podcast, available once again at fansided.com. You can check Matt out Mondays on this program at this time, or you can check him out on Twitter at Matt Verderame. Matt, the winning offensive coordinator in the Super Bowl did not get a head coaching gig, but the losing offensive and defensive coordinators in the Super Bowl are both going to be head coaches. Shane Steichen to Indianapolis, Jonathan Gannon to Arizona to round out the coaching carousel. What do you think of the head coaching prospects of both Steichen and Gannon? Do you think that they will find success in the head coaching role?
Tell you what, if they do, they earned it, because those are two challenging situations. I mean, I don't think anybody's envious. Indy and Arizona, I would argue, along with Denver, those are maybe the three worst jobs in the league right now. I mean, those now, Denver, you could say, well, if Peyton can fix Russell Wilson, then all's well and right in the world. Maybe. But if he can't, that is a rough job for the next handful of years. I mean, they haven't had first-round picks for a while. But as to Arizona and Indianapolis, I would bet more on Steichen than Gannon for this reason. Steichen at least can go out and get a rookie quarterback this year. I mean, whether or not it's Stroud or Bryce Young, like, they can go out and get that guy. And if they're right with that guy, they can be good in a hurry. We've all seen the NFL. You get a quarterback, everything else follows suit pretty quick. Look at the Bengals. That all said, that is a bad roster, and that is an unpredictable owner, and there's a lot to be fixed there. But I think Steichen has a better chance. Gannon, to me, I'm terrified for him with that staff. Like, you hired a first-time offensive coordinator, a first-time defensive coordinator. The defensive coordinator is 29 years old, okay, and has been nothing but a quality control coach, except for the last 2 years when he coached the Philadelphia linebackers, who I'd argue, by the way, were the weak point of that defense. You know who else hired a whole bunch of first-year people in their new positions?
Nathaniel Hackett.
Denver last year. How'd that go? Like, and there's no quarterback for half the year because Kyler Murray's hurt. And now you've given Kyler Murray a first-time offensive coordinator and a defensive head coach. I would actually argue, if you said to me right now, you got to bet your mortgage, who you got for the first overall pick next year, it'd be Arizona. So I feel better for Steichen than I do for Gannon.
Meanwhile, let's talk about the guys on the field. Derek Carr is starting to take some free agent visits after the Las Vegas Raiders released their longtime quarterback. Apparently, his most recent visit was to New York with the Jets. Would the Jets roster as currently constructed, and with any additions they can make through the draft, would it be the best roster that Derek Carr has ever been a part of if he indeed is the next quarterback of the Jets?
Good question. It'd be up there. I'd have to think about that. It would be up there for sure. I mean, the Raiders have probably had more star power at times on their roster, but they've always been paper thin. They've never had any depth. I'll tell you what, I think it's probably the best coach he's ever had, and certainly the best defense he's ever had. So in that regard, yeah, I mean, look, I think if you're Carr, it's probably the best situation. 1 through 53, maybe not at the thing, but yeah, it's a really good situation for him if he goes there. Also, just really a great job by the Raiders to get nothing for Derek Carr. In a league that Carson Wentz was traded multiple times for like decent amounts of capital in return, the Raiders were able to do absolutely nothing with Derek Carr because with 2 meaningless games left, could have just said like, hey, got a little bit of an injury and just sat him for 2 games, but they were like, no, that's all right, just go home. So everybody knows we have no leverage going into the offseason. And then, like, slowly leaked out a few things about the guy and then just got rid of him. So, look, I think if your Carr, if you're going to throw it to death and play it out that way, the Jets would make a lot. I think the Jets are a playoff team with them, for sure. Now, are they a contender? Probably not. And the AFC is so deep and so loaded at the quarterback spot, I don't think they'd be a Super Bowl contender. I think they're probably like a 10-win team. Probably going to the playoffs, maybe even win around if they got the right matchup.
We're chatting with Matt Verderame from Fansided.com. Joins us here on 580 Sports Talk, usually on Mondays, but because of the holiday yesterday, he was kind enough to join us on Tuesday this week instead. You can find Matt on Twitter at Matt Verderame and go check out his great work over at Fansided.com as well, including the Stacking the Box column and podcast and the Arrowhead Addict podcast for all of your Chiefs needs. The franchise tag, Matt, went live, for lack of a better word, today. So between now and March 7th, teams will be able to use the franchise tag on one of their players if they choose to do so. Right now, on February 21st, who is one player around the league who you feel like is a shoo-in to get the tag?
Well, I give you a few of them, but first of all, Orlando Brown. I mean, he's getting tagged. Unless something shocking happens and they agree on a long-term deal, getting tagged. Lamar Jackson is getting tagged. Again, unless the Ravens and Jackson come to some shocking agreement here in the next week and a half, like he's going to get tagged. Daniel Jones, I think it's pretty clear he's getting tagged. I know they could go with Saquon Barkley. Look, they can't lose Daniel Jones for nothing. They're not going to lose him. Like, they can live with losing Saquon Barkley because they get a compensatory. They get a third-round pick for him. Which is not great, but it's okay. It's not, you can't lose Daniel Jones for third-round pick. So I think those guys are all shoo-ins to be tagged. Then you get into the other guys. There's Deron Payne going to get tagged in Washington, Dalton Schultz in Dallas, maybe. I mean, there's maybe another, I don't know, a total of a dozen guys who are eligible. Jamal Dean in Tampa, does he get tagged? There's some other guys, but Brown, Jackson, Jones are three that jump to mind immediately as guys are like, yeah, they're getting tagged. And then it's just a question of, do they sign long-term deals? Do they play in the tag? Do they get traded? So on and so forth.
And that last point is what I wanted to follow up with when it comes to Orlando Brown in particular. Do you think that would be a tag for the sake of we want to make sure we have extra time to get a deal done? Or does that feel like, well, we only might want you for one more year, so we'll give you a second tag?
I think they'd like to work out a long-term deal, but it's got to work for both sides. Last year, of course, they couldn't figure it out. But the reality of it is, there's this weird conversation sometimes around Orlando Brown with Kansas City fans where it's like, well, he's not great. Okay, yeah, but he's not bad either. Like, he's a good player. He's a good, solid. Some years he's Pro Bowl worthy. Some years maybe he's not, but he might make it because of his name, like this year. Like, he's a solid player. I mean, you just went through the playoffs and watched them play really, really well all throughout the playoffs against some really good pass rush. Like, to me, is that guy worth $20, $21 million a year? Yeah, he probably is. He probably is worth that. Maybe worth $22 million a year. And you know what? I'd argue on the Chiefs, there is nobody more important to that team outside of Mahomes than who the left tackle is. So, I mean, realistically, I've had people asking, do you think they'll trade him? And then get who? Because the free agency market is atrocious this year. And there are very few guys outside the safety position or even worth talking about. So, who are you going to go get? It'd probably be somebody in the draft. Now, like, you're drafting a rookie left tackle and hoping it works out because you're picking 31st. I mean, that is a huge risk. And by the way, yes, it is 31st for those listening. There's a forfeiture of a pick for Miami. So I think for the Chiefs, you tag them and then you work toward a long-term deal. If you can't get it, you can't get it. But I think you really try to make that happen.
Matt Verderame covers the entire NFL for Fansided.com. Go check out his work at Fansided. That includes the Stacking the Box column every Monday, the Stacking the Box podcast, and for Chief-specific stuff, the Arrowhead Addict podcast. You can also follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Verderame. Matt, we appreciate you joining us a day later than normal. Hope you enjoyed the long weekend, and we will talk to you coming up next week.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
That is Matt Verderame from Fansided.com. Awesome insight into all things NFL and a perfect segue to the 4 o'clock hour of the show. We'll talk a little bit more about Orlando Brown, the franchise tag, and why it just makes too much sense to use it, and to me, to use it in order to get a long-term deal done. We've also got What Is Wrong With You and Jayhawk Weekly all coming up in the 4 o'clock hour of 580 Sports Talk here on 580 WIBW. Now, 4 o'clock hour of 580 Sports Talk going up on a Tuesday. Brendan Dworzinski here with you to lead off this 4 o'clock hour of the program. Thank you so much for stopping by for the first show of the week here on 580 Sports Talk and the sports voice of Kansas. No show yesterday, obviously, because of President's Day, but we appreciate you stopping by this afternoon. If you missed the first hour of the show, head over to our website, 580wibw.com. Hover your cursor over the podcasts tab right in the center of the page, and then when a menu pops up, just click on 580 Sports Talk, and that's where you'll find the hour-by-hour breakdown of the show. And, of course, it is a shortened show today as well. This is the final hour of the program today. We're done at 5 to make way for the K-State Radio Network. Wildcats basketball coming up this evening. 5 o'clock pregame, 6 o'clock tip-off from Bramlage Coliseum as K-State takes on the Baylor Bears, a massive game for both programs in the Big 12 race. K-State not really contending for the league crown at this point, but seeding for the Big 12 tournament coming up in just a couple of weeks, and also potentially seeding for the NCAA tournament coming up next month as well. This weekend, when the NCAA tournament committee unveiled their initial top 4 seeds for each region, K-State was a 3. I was amazed, personally, that K-State was a 3. I thought their recent struggles going into Saturday would have bumped them down to a 4, but very good spot to be in going into the final couple weeks of the season. And, well, I don't think there's anyone who would doubt that a big win tonight over Baylor, which is still, I think, a Final Four contender, would do wonders for K-State seeding come tournament time. So, again, 5 o'clock pregame, 6 o'clock K-State versus Baylor tip-off here on your home for K-State Sports, 580 WIBW. Coming up on this final hour of this shortened edition of 580 Sports Talk for today, we'll get to Orlando Brown in just a second. We've also got What Is Wrong With You, our first What Is Wrong With You of the week. And Michael Swain from Fog.net and 24/7 Sports will stop by for the 23rd Street Brewery Jayhawk Weekly, recapping a couple of huge wins for KU over the last 4 days, the insane win over Baylor on Saturday, and then last night's road win against TCU as well. That's coming up at the bottom of the hour. Of course, your texts are welcome at all times on the Big O Tires text line. That number is 785-272-9429. And the comment section on YouTube is open as well. Our channel, Sports on 580 WIBW. Make sure you are subscribed so you are the first to know when Dan goes live for his post-game wrap tonight from Bramlage Coliseum. He'll be handling the post-game duties. Write-up will be over at 580wibw.com, and his post-game live instant reaction video can be found on our YouTube. Again, that channel, also home to our 580 Sports Talk live streams, is Sports on 580 WIBW. Today in the NFL, one of the more important days of the early offseason calendar, it is the first day in which teams can use the franchise tag. So between now, today, February 21st, and March 7th, it's a fairly small window, about 2 weeks. Teams can elect to use the exclusive or non-exclusive franchise tag on one player who is a pending free agent. Now, the valuations for each position were released today as well because, well, you're not going to pay a running back the same amount as a wide receiver or as a cornerback or as a linebacker, certainly a quarterback, etc. And the place we're going to start in is with the offensive line, because that is the position that is going to impact the Chiefs the most when it comes to whether or not they will or will not use the franchise tag this year. I want to preface this by saying the NFL handles the franchise tag valuations by position so terribly poorly. They've got all offensive linemen listed as an $18.2 million value for this year. So if you put the franchise tag on any offensive lineman to keep them under contract for 1 year, guaranteed for injury, they'll get paid $18.2 million. But it's ridiculous and frankly asinine to say that a left tackle is always worth the same as a right tackle, who's always worth the same as either guard or your center. They all serve different purposes. They all have different value, and certain teams might value left or right tackle more. For example, Miami Dolphins, they probably value their right tackle more than their left because they've got a lefty quarterback. So the blind side is protected by the right tackle, just like most teams value the left tackle more than they would value a guard or a center. So to a degree, any team who wants to use the franchise tag on a tackle gets a little bit of a bump because the value of a guard and a center brings it down a little bit. It's ridiculous how they handle that. It's like how the AP for forever was using really outdated positions for their AP teams. Linebacker doesn't mean in 2022 or 2023 what it did in 1985. You could have a 3-4 outside linebacker, 4-3 outside linebacker, off ball, strong side, weak side, so many different positions that mean different things, and yet they all fall into the same category. But that's really more of a personal complaint than it is anything of real importance when it comes to the Chiefs and their offseason right now. What is of major importance for the Chiefs is what they're going to do with Orlando Brown. He played, as we all famously remember, on the franchise tag for this Super Bowl season in 2022. Game played, obviously, in 2023. But because he played on the tag already, his tag is actually more expensive this year. When you get tagged 2 years in a row, you don't just get the value of the franchise tag the next year. You actually get 120% of your first tag. So, in other words, take the tag he played on this past season that just wrapped up 9 days ago, and then multiply it by 1.2, essentially, and that is the value you get for the second franchise tag. So, if the Chiefs elect to tag him again, give him the 1 year guaranteed salary, and only keep him for the short term, it would actually cost them $19.99 million, just a tick under $20 million for the year. That would be the fourth highest average value for a tackle in the entire NFL. The only guys who would be worth more on their contract on a year-to-year basis, Trent Williams in San Francisco. Right now, I think by far the best tackle of any sort, right or left, in the NFL. Number 2, David Bakhtiari, who dealt with a lot of injuries the last couple of years, missed all of 2021 and missed a lot of 2022 as well. But when he still played, he was still phenomenal. And Pro Football Focus fleshed that out in their grades this year. He makes $23 million a year. He's number 2 on the list. And then Laramie Tunsil in Houston, who gets $22 million on average per year. Other great tackles in the league: Ronnie Stanley, Ryan Ramczyk, who's the first right tackle we've mentioned, Jake Matthews in Atlanta, Lane Johnson, who played on the Eagles this year, who's been playing for forever, played through a torn groin this year. He's only making $18 million a year. And I say only, obviously, speaking in relative terms. Orlando Brown would be all the way above all those guys if he was to get a second franchise tag at 120% of last year's value. So the big question is, and I think this is, in fact, the biggest question facing the Chiefs going into this offseason, would you do it? Would you put a second franchise tag in a row on Orlando Brown? Or would you try to extend him long term? And those don't even have to be mutually exclusive concepts. Those could be the same thing. That's sort of the beauty of the franchise tag and what it was initially supposed to be used for. Was you used it, and it was essentially a last resort. We're going to get an extra period of time into the summer, several months past that March 7th deadline, where you're on the 1-year deal, but we get a window where we can work out a longer-term contract, where we can figure out if we want to trade you, where we can figure out if we want to work out something long-term. Lots of teams do this. The one that stands out to me, the Green Bay Packers, did this last year with Davante Adams. He was franchise tagged, and the Packers then, 16 days later, traded him to the Las Vegas Raiders. They got that extra period of time. With all the reporting that has come out since that move, it was pretty obvious all offseason up until the deadline last year, they wanted to move him, but they needed extra time to make sure they got the highest bidder, they got the right compensation, etc. So that is something you can do after you assign the franchise tag. You can try to find a trade partner for another couple of months, or at least an extra month before you get to the NFL draft. You can try to, during that time period, work out a long-term deal. Of course, if you're going to do that, you'd probably rather get it done before you put the tag on, but it's a possibility. Or you can do what most teams do and say, yeah, well, we don't want to commit to you long-term, but we can shell out some money to you right now in the short term, keep you for one more year, and then move on from you, kick you to the curb after that. That's what most teams do with the tag, and it sure is a possibility the Chiefs could do that again this year. But if I was in Brett Veach's shoes, if it wasn't Chris Shea and Brant Tillis dealing with the money for the Kansas City Chiefs player personnel department, and it was me dealing with it, I'm signing Orlando Brown to a long-term deal. He is still very young. For a player who is at the top of his game, who is going to get a big contract this year one way or the other, he is still really young. He's not even all the way into his late 20s at this point. There's a lot of career left for Orlando Brown. There's theoretically a peak still left for Orlando Brown, who's been a very good player at both right and left tackle between Baltimore and Kansas City during the course of his career. And frankly, he's coming off the best game of his career, at least his Chiefs career, in Super Bowl 57. He kept Patrick Mahomes clean all game long against an incredibly talented edge rusher group and overall defensive line group from Philadelphia. That is certainly going to help his case, whether it comes to franchise tag or trade or let walk in free agency or re-sign to a long-term deal. Honestly, with what we've seen in terms of what his best is and can be, I'm keeping that guy around. And maybe you do need to put the franchise tag on him, and it looks like you might have to pay him almost $20 million this year in order to get that extra long period of time to work something out. But if you're going to pay him top 4 tackle money anyway, I would just try to sign him to a long-term deal at that number. And there's a couple of reasons why. One, the cap is going to keep going up. Media deals for the NFL are going to keep becoming more and more lucrative for the NFL. It is going up $20 million approximately per team this year. That is a ton of money, and it's only going to keep going up at least $10 million, we expect, every single year from 24 to 25 to 26, et cetera, et cetera. If you're paying him, let's just use $20 million as the round number. If you're paying him about $20 million a year, maybe slightly lower at the beginning, slightly higher at the end, or vice versa, that's not going to do any massive damage to your salary cap hits over the course of time. In fact, 3 or 4 years into that contract, it's probably going to look like a steal. That's the nature of the NFL salary cap. Huge deals that you give guys look like they're albatrosses when you first hand them out. But then after a couple of years, when the cap keeps going up and other guys get paid ahead of them, you say, well, that really wasn't that bad of a deal in the first place. You know who the best example of that is? Patrick Mahomes and his $500 million that he has been contractually guaranteed by the Kansas City Chiefs. You look at the way they structured that contract. Hell, you even look at the annual value of that contract. I'd say, dang, the Chiefs got a bargain. He's the best quarterback in the league. He's the best player in the league. And guys like Josh Allen are getting paid what they're getting paid. Joe Burrow is about to get an insane amount of money. Those guys are good. Those guys are great. Burrow's even been to a Super Bowl. Allen hasn't even done that. But Mahomes got paid first, which means over the long term, especially with a deal as long term as Mahomes' is, it's not nearly as much of a bear. It's not nearly as much of a burden on your team's salary cap. And I think the same thing applies to this Orlando Brown situation. Sure, the first year of the deal, 2023, that $20 million a year average, that's going to be the 4th highest amount in the NFL. But come 2025, come 2026, when Laramie Tunsil's going to get another deal, Ryan Ramczyk might get another deal. Some of the young tackles around the league are going to get major deals. Braden Smith, the Olathe product, he's going to get paid at some point. Jordan Mailata in Philly, only making $16 million a year going into this year, he is going to get an absurd amount of money on his next contract. So over time, a long-term deal signed right now with Brown, that's not going to look bad at all. In fact, that might look like a great deal long-term, as long as he keeps up the level of play he performed with this season. And I think that is the next most important part of this. Is Orlando Brown a top 4 tackle in the NFL, like his contract would indicate? Honestly, no. Some of those names I brought up earlier, obviously Williams, Bakhtiari, Tunsil, I'd put all those guys over Orlando Brown. I think Ronnie Stanley is the better tackle when he's healthy. Now, granted, he's got to be healthy long term. I think he's a really darn good left tackle. Ryan Ramczyk is a right tackle. I think he is in the elite category. Like I mentioned earlier, Mailata, he's up there. There are a bunch of guys who could fit in that category who are just as good, if not better, than Orlando Brown. But if you are of the opinion that he is at least a top 10 offensive tackle in the league, or at least left tackle, you get 32 starters. If he's at least in the top 10, I think you keep him around. We spoke to Matt Verderame from Fansided.com, national NFL writer, last hour. And he said, what, do you think you're going to do better? Chiefs fans who want to get rid of him, do you think you're going to do better than Orlando Brown? And I'm inclined to agree with him. The class of free agent tackles this year, I wouldn't even say it's down. It is straight up bad. Orlando Brown, by miles, light years, would be the best tackle on the market. Whether you're looking left, right, it doesn't matter. He will be, should he hit free agency, the best tackle on the market. Who's the next best available? You want to go back to Eric Fisher? Is that who you want to sign? 32 years old, coming off some severe injuries, bounced around the league ever since the Chiefs let go of him after the 2020 season and the debacle in Super Bowl 55. You want to go out and get 31-year-old Billy Turner, who's had some good years, but at this point, he's probably a decent second tackle, whether you're putting him at right or left. Jason Peters is 41 years old. You want to go give him another spin? Give him a chance? Those are the kind of guys who are available in free agency. I'm not even saying this just to make a point. That is truly the list of some of the best free agent tackles available. The best one, most talented one, who is lined up to be a free agent this year is probably Atlanta's Caleb McGarry, but he's probably going to get the franchise tag from Atlanta, and he's a right tackle anyway. You probably don't want to convert a second consecutive right tackle into a left like the Chiefs did with Orlando Brown. I know Brown had a little bit of a different situation when he was with Baltimore. He got moved from right to left, but still, he came into the league as a right tackle and was moved full-time to left after Baltimore traded him to Kansas City. So you're not signing a better left tackle than Orlando Brown. And do you really think you're going to get a sweetheart deal on a trade like you did when you traded with Baltimore 2 off seasons ago? Let's not forget, John Harbaugh and Andy Reid have a pretty darn good relationship. Those franchises have a pretty darn good relationship. The Chiefs did not have to give up all that much to go and get Orlando Brown. Okay, yeah, they moved out of the first round. They got a second rounder back. And you know who their 2 second rounders that year were? Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton. All Pro Bowl caliber players. The Chiefs, in the end, made out like bandits on that deal. Baltimore did not get nearly as much back as they probably could or should have gotten for Orlando Brown. You're not getting that deal again. And who is going to make that deal? Brown was disgruntled in Baltimore, not necessarily because he had beef with Harbaugh or with their then offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, or with the owner, Steve Biscotti, or anything like that. They wanted to move him back to right tackle. He said, no, I was destined to play left tackle like my dad. Send me somewhere where I can play it. And they did. Are there any guys like that out there? No. That guy doesn't exist right now, at least as far as the public is aware. Packers aren't trading David Bakhtiari for peanuts, I can tell you that much. Teams like that aren't just willing to give away franchise caliber, top 10 caliber left or right tackles. So if you're not going to find that guy in free agency, and you're not going to find that guy in all likelihood through a trade, and if you signed him to a long-term deal now, it probably will look good against the cap within the next 2 or 3 years, why wouldn't you get that deal done now? And I understand that maybe there are things on tape that the Chiefs personnel department don't love long-term or don't think that he'll be able to keep up and reproduce long-term and replicate long-term. But honestly, I'm happy if I'm the Chiefs getting a top 10 tackle for the next several years, knowing that Patrick Mahomes is going to be at least relatively safe behind this offensive line. You don't need a whole lot more greatness on this Chiefs team. Would you like it? Would you like it if all 22 of your starters plus your 3 specialists were all truly great players? Sure you would. What team wouldn't? But when you've got a Hall of Fame head coach, what will soon be a Hall of Fame quarterback, the greatest tight end to ever play the game, a great player on your defensive line in Chris Jones, potentially future greats both in your linebacking and cornerback cores, plus along your offensive line, you can live with Orlando Brown simply being good to very good. You can live with that. So to me, I think it's almost a conservative move to try to get a long-term deal done with Orlando Brown so that you don't have to go through trying to find a trade or trying to make a free agent work or even trying to make a draft pick work. We know how much of a crapshoot the NFL draft is. You get the deal done now. You take care of one of the most important positions in football for the long term. So I am expecting that the tag is going to be handed out to Orlando Brown, but I'm hoping that it's used not for its modern purpose, which is just, yeah, we'll use you for 1 year and then kick you to the curb. I hope it's used for its original purpose as just a bridge to getting something long-term done, because that is another headache that the Chiefs offense, that Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs as a whole don't have to worry about till probably 2026 or 2027. Orlando Brown, probably the biggest name, or maybe the most important name, who is a potential candidate for a tag this year. There are a few others, though. The next biggest name who might be tagged is Lamar Jackson, and quarterback, obviously most important position in football. But hey, the Ravens haven't won a Super Bowl with him, like the Chiefs have won a Super Bowl with Orlando Brown as their left tackle. I think Jackson is probably going to get a tag. I think that one is pretty obvious at this point. Same with Daniel Jones in New York. I think quarterbacks, they're so valuable, and you want to lock them up long-term when you've got a really good one. But you've got two very different situations there with Jackson and Jones in Baltimore and New York, respectively. Both of whom I think it makes sense to get them on the tag, at least for the short term. Jones, because you've only got 1 year of him even really being competent. You don't know what he can be long-term. And for Jackson, is he a long-term option in an offense that's not run by Greg Roman and is not a complete run-heavy offense? I don't know. We don't know. I think he can be. I think he could be. We don't know for sure that he will be. So I think those are two very obvious tag options. We've got a comment in on the YouTube stream from Matt, our resident Cowboys fan, who says he sees Dallas using the franchise tag on Tony Pollard over their tight end, Dalton Schultz. Pollard, obviously the best running back that Dallas has. Not the biggest name. That's still Ezekiel Elliott. Zeke is still Jerry Jones's boy, which is actually why I don't see Pollard getting the tag. I think the Cowboys would rather go find someone else and have him be second banana to Ezekiel Elliott, because Jerry Jones just loves the guy so much. I don't really know why, but I don't really understand how Jerry Jones operates in general or why he operates the way that he does. So I think the Cowboys might not use it. They might let both Pollard and Schultz walk off to free agency, but both those guys, big names. The other one, another New York Giant who I think is a fascinating case, Saquon Barkley, who had a rejuvenated year in 2022, had a great season when he was on the field. But if you're already going to use the tag on Daniel Jones, you really can't end up using it then on Saquon Barkley. You only get one of them. And frankly, you'd probably rather have the quarterback than a running back who's had a bunch of injury troubles and has had a fairly up and down career so far. So definitely some interesting names out there. But the biggest and most important one, I still think, is Orlando Brown. I assume he'll get the tag. I hope it's for a long-term deal, though. We've got to take a break here on 580 Sports Talk. Michael Swain will join us later on this hour for Jayhawk Weekly. But first, we've got the first What Is Wrong With You of the week coming up next here on 580 WIBW. Tuesday afternoon, which means 2 new stories going head-to-head to find our first week winner. Dan, why don't you go first with today's stories?
We are heading over to Florida, Clearwater, Florida. We have a Florida story today here on What Is Wrong With You. And it's a story that calls to mind one of my favorite Simpsons gags of all time from Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2, the famous 2-part Whodunit. I won't spoil it in case you haven't seen a 30-year-old episode of television. But anyhow, Kent Brockman, the newsman, is doing a report about Mr. Burns at the beginning of Part 2 and says Burns was taken to a hospital and was pronounced dead. He was then transferred to a better hospital where his condition was upgraded to alive. So we go to Clearwater, Florida, where 2 West Central Florida paramedics pronounced a man dead who was later found not to be dead.
Oh, no.
The paramedics from Clearwater Fire and Rescue have been placed on administrative duty. The paramedics responded to a call about a 65-year-old man in cardiac arrest at a private residence in unincorporated Pinellas County. The responders pronounced the man dead shortly after their arrival. They left the area once deputies from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office arrived to investigate. According to the news release, a deputy noticed the patient was breathing and requested medical crews to return to the scene. About 28 minutes elapsed between the initial call and the arrival of medics from Largo Fire Rescue. The man was taken to the hospital and is still recovering. Jennifer Poirier, Clearwater's interim city manager, told local television that the actions of the 2 paramedics were, quote, not up to the city's standard. So they got there and say, yeah, he's dead-ish.
So here is my question.
Dead enough.
I think this is a fair question to ask. What indicated to these paramedics that he was dead if he was still breathing?
That's a great question. They looked at him. He wasn't moving. Maybe they nudged him with the sole of their shoe. And, it's like that iPhone commercial with the dead lizard.
Oh, yeah, where they unsend the text?
Yeah, where the guy unsends the text. Yeah, same deal. They walked up on it. Yeah, he's not moving. Chest rising or falling? Not really. Dead enough. Bag him and tag him, boys.
There have been moments with my family dog, Rusty, who loves to sleep. Like 22 hours a day, this dog is sleeping. And there are times when he is so out of it that I won't see his stomach moving, and I'll kind of shake him. Like, Rusty, are you up? And he'll either move his head or he'll bark or growl or whatever. And I think, okay, he's fine. I imagine with a human, it's probably fairly similar to say, oh, well, let's touch his feet. Let's check for a pulse. Let's check if he's breathing at all. Let's shake him. Let's do anything. I don't know how you could possibly do any number of those things and not come away with, yes, this man is alive. How is that? I cannot really make sense of that to the point where you would go as far as to say, yes, he is dead. Not even, let's get a second opinion on whether or not this guy is alive or dead.
Well, their second opinion was each other. 2 guys or 2 people. And they say, yeah, man, that's close enough to dead for us. Well, let's just get out of the way. Let the investigators take over. The investigators determined, well, you've made one tiny mistake. Man is alive. All the best to him, by the way, for a speedy recovery.
Yeah, I'm glad he's still recovering from possibly being dead. Oh, my goodness. My story is going to take us down to H-Town today. We're going to Houston, where we meet 25-year-old Alexis Davis and 21-year-old Treasure Bibbs. Now, Dan, you and your wife live in a house now.
Yes.
And I imagine from your past, when you used to live in apartments, you probably had a story or 2 of some bad neighbors. They were too loud for one reason or another, maybe.
Yeah.
I think everyone's dealt with that. My wife and I surely have dealt with our fair share of noisy neighbors. Well, Treasure and Alexis, they had some neighbors who a couple of different times have been a little too loud with their lovemaking next door. And they've been able to hear it in their own apartment. So they decided to take it into their own hands to try to get the noisy lovemaking to stop next door. They threatened to murder their neighbors and their children.
That's excessive.
According to police, an ongoing dispute over noise emanating from a nearby apartment had already resulted in Davis and Bibbs leaving notes on the neighboring couple's door, threatening to kill 30-year-old Kevin and 29-year-old Kiera, as well as the couple's children. So back on February 13th at the Worthington development, Davis and Bibbs allegedly brandished a firearm, threatened to kill them for being too noisy. And that eventually got the police called on them, and you can imagine that they were swiftly apprehended. Bibbs was able to pay for her bond, $15,000 bond. Meanwhile, Davis remains locked up in lieu of $200,000 bond because she is also facing trial for a prior felony case for which she was already out on bond. That was a theft of a car that had been repossessed from her and was at a used car lot in Houston.
So, two things here. Number one, that the couple has children, plural.
Multiple.
So, if their neighbors can hear these two doing it,
that's fair.
Like,
fair point.
Think of your own children, man. Maybe keep that noise down for your own children's sake. Never mind your neighbors. The other thing that I have to share, I had neighbors. I lived in a basement level duplex when I lived in Wyoming, and the floor above, they were making a lot of noise for a while. It sounded like they were rearranging the furniture in their living room like every night.
Mm-hmm.
It was just loud, dragging across the floor. I got mad about it. I bang the ceiling with a bat like a 70-year-old man. Keep it down up there.
Get the broom, start poking the ceiling tiles.
Anyway, it was a young woman and her boyfriend that lived there, and the young woman worked at a local convenience store. And I happened to bump into her buying a soda or whatever, and she said, "Are you hearing our hamster?" It was a hamster in a hamster ball on a wood floor getting some exercise, getting a little cardio in, that was making this terrible sound. They're like, we'll keep him on the rug. I say, yeah, do that. Because you can't believe how much noise a hamster was making.
Are you hearing our hamster? Wow, that's incredible.
But it was wild that they knew exactly what it had to have been.
Yeah, right. They didn't think maybe we should stop this.
Yeah.
This guy's banging on our floor from his ceiling because of our hamster.
I'm taking a baseball bat. Come on, cut it out.
Oh my God, that's funny. We had neighbors at one point who had the world's loudest subwoofer and loved the world's worst electronic music.
Oh.
But it was really at its best when it was 3 a.m., which for me, you know my sleeping habits. I was just getting ready for bed at that time. And I thought, okay, well, I'm mildly annoyed. My wife would have been in bed for about 4 hours at that point and not nearly as thrilled with the electric music next door.
Being in a club you don't want to be at.
Right, exactly. But this one, I can't go home because I already am home.
Yeah.
Who's your pick for today's What Is Wrong With You?
I got to go with the paramedics who said a guy was dead when he wasn't. I would think that would be like one of the first things you learn at paramedic school is how to judge whether a person is alive or not.
Yeah, what is the first rule of being an EMT? Making sure they are alive or dead. For real, though.
Dead-ish is not dead.
We need a 100% guarantee that this person is dead before you tell us that they are dead. I'm with you. That is just preposterous. And that is our winner, our first winner of the week here in What Is Wrong With You. We've got to take a quick time out. When we come back, Michael Swain from Fog.net will join us for 23rd Street Brewery Jayhawk Weekly right here on 580 Sports Talk. Michael Swain of Fog.net joins us on 580 Sports Talk every Tuesday, bottom of the 4 o'clock hour for Jayhawk Weekly. Brought to you by 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence. If you're looking for a place to go watch KU versus West Virginia coming up this coming Saturday, the 23rd Street Brewery is the place for that. Great food, great beer, and a great place to watch the game. That's at the corner of 23rd Street and Castle in Lawrence, the 23rd Street Brewery. Michael, of course, joins us. He covers all things Jayhawks for 24/7 Sports and Fog.net. You can find him on Twitter as well, at mswain247. And Michael, we'll get to last night's game between KU and TCU here in just a moment, the actual game itself, and also this weekend's win for the Jayhawks over the Baylor Bears. But the post-game celebration for KU last night, I was unaware that things were so personal between KU and TCU, but man, the way KU is celebrating, it sure does seem that way.
I'm here for it. Let's be honest. College sports should be fun. And I think that inter rivalries like this, interconference rivalries that come out of something as silly as taking a basketball from another team's arena is great. And for those that maybe don't know the story, TCU obviously beat KU in January. And when they left down Fieldhouse, they took one of the game balls that obviously has a Jayhawk logo, and two TCU players kind of took a photo of it on the plane back to Fort Worth. So KU went down there with the mission of getting a ball back and taking it back with the victory. And that's exactly what DeJuan Harris did. At the buzzer, he sprinted, 60 feet to go grab one of the balls and make sure he got it. And they wrote all over it. And Grady Dick grabbed some of the T-shirts that were available. And I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this. Obviously there have been rivalries and fierce rivalries like this, but something maybe as public as this is a little new. And again, I'm totally here for it. I think it makes all these games so much more fun.
I leaned over to my wife right as the final horn sounded and we were watching the game, and I said, why is DeJuan running off the floor after the ball? Because I think it was Mike Miles who chucked it at the very end of the game. It was nowhere close to the rim, and they would have lost anyway, even if it had gone in. And Harris goes and chases it down the tunnel, and I thought, why is he going after the ball? And it obviously made a whole lot more sense about an hour later when the guys left the locker room. As for the game itself, though, Michael, that was not a pretty basketball game. It was not aesthetically pleasing at all, but KU still gets it done against the top 25 team on the road. It's a revenge game as well. And I want to start with Kevin McCullough because he is playing the best basketball of his tenure at KU and maybe of his entire college career right now, between last week against Oklahoma State, this weekend against Baylor, and then especially on the defensive end last night against TCU. It really does feel like he's rounding into form at the right time. Have you noticed something similar?
Yeah, I think so. I think defensively, he's always kind of been maybe this consistent. The flash plays maybe just haven't been there for him. Bill Self has talked a lot about how Kevin makes up for other people's mistakes that maybe, a casual fan or a media member like myself can't really pick up on in the moment. You have to go back and watch a game again to see those moments. But I think what you see now is some of those kind of flash plays come up, right? You think about him forcing the jump ball on what was basically the final possession of the game. That was a huge play. And you look at him coming out of nowhere to block an open 3-point shot in the first half. I mean, Kevin really seemed to enjoy that one. I think he was giving some guys a hard time on TCU after that one. So I think you're overall seeing more of maybe the highlight plays that someone like Marcus Garrett made a bunch during his KU career. And that's a player that Bill Self kind of compared McCullough to. And if you listen to Bill Self talk about Marcus Garrett during his time at KU, I mean, how highly regarded Self had him. And for him to compare Kevin McCullough's basketball IQ defensively to Marcus Garrett, I mean, that's just saying a whole lot about him. And I think the big change for him has come offensively too, where, I mean, his 3-point shot has been awful lately, right? I think he's shooting like 19% from three over his last 10 games. But the thing is, he's taking 1.5 fewer threes than he was kind of over the final few non-conference games in the start of conference play. So he's really become more of a 2-point shooter who's going to take an open 3-point shot. And I think that's huge because I think early in conference play, right, it seemed like he was trying to force a square peg into a round hole in terms of just the shot selection and who he wanted to be. And I think in terms of his role, he seems a lot more, I wouldn't say comfortable, but more in tune with what he's being asked to do and where kind of the spots he can have success.
We're joined by Michael Swain, KU beat writer for Fog.net and 24/7 Sports here on 580 Sports Talk. It's Jayhawk Weekly, brought to you by the 23rd Street Brewery at the corner of 23rd Street and Castle in Lawrence. You can find Michael on Twitter at mswain247, and of course, go check out all of his great work covering the Jayhawks at Fog.net. One guy who did not play especially well last night, Michael, was Jalen Wilson, who is going to be an All-American. He's going to be a probably consensus first-team All-American this year. I think he's going to be the Big 12 Player of the Year as well, and especially when you factor in the injuries to Mike Miles, I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion too. But this is now the second time in just the last few games for KU that he really hasn't played all that well on the offensive end, which is where he had to carry the Jayhawks for a handful of games earlier on in Big 12 play. How much does it say to you about how much this team has grown and how the pieces around Wilson have grown that now twice in the last few weeks, they've been able to pick him up and win a game even when he hasn't been able to score?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? You know, KU was never going to go far if Jalen Wilson had to carry the team like he did during kind of that 3-game losing streak in the surrounding games around that. You know, it just wasn't sustainable. And obviously, you saw the same thing with Ochai Agbaji last year, right? Where I think over the final 5 conference games or so, he really struggled because at that point in the season, Big 12 teams know exactly what each player is going to do. And if you're as good of a player as you are like Jalen Wilson, the opposing team is going to make you their number one game plan. And a number one game plan in the first week of January is a lot different than the number one game plan in the last week of February, where there's so much tape, there's so much tendency that you know what the other person's going to do. I think teams have made it a point to stop Jalen. And I think it shows also the growth in terms of the mindset from DeJuan Harris, where he's attacking a lot more, the growth in mindset from Kevin McCullough, where he's embracing that role, and even Grady Dick being more consistent, even if he has a second half like yesterday where he goes 17 and a half minutes without scoring. But overall, I think this whole team is just so much more in tune with their roles, where when someone like Jalen Wilson doesn't have a great game, well, KU can go out and make TCU play poorly, right? And that's something that Bill Self has just been harping on for, basically 6 weeks now, that this is a team that needs to make opponents play poorly. And they hadn't done that. And I think it's the reason why they struggled during that losing streak. And it's why I think at times they've really struggled to blow some teams out that maybe you think, oh, KU should be in a position to do that. But a game like last night where you look at, okay, Kevin McCullough is really the only guy that was a true standout performer. DeJuan Harris was solid, right? Had some up and down moments. Grady Dick had a really good first half, a quiet second half, and yet somehow Kansas goes in and gets a top 25 road win. That happens because you make the opposing team play poorly, which in and of itself is a huge growth point for this team.
Do you think KU at this point deserves to be the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament? I mean, we've all heard all the stats about this team. They lost over 70% of their scoring, and yet they're in position to win at least a share of the Big 12 championship yet again. They've got 14 quad 1 wins, which is tied for as many as any program has had going into the tournament since they instituted the net and the quad system, and KU still got 3 regular season games left. Does that resume stack up better, Michael, than the ones that Houston or Purdue or Alabama bring to the table?
It does. And I think here's kind of the sticking point for me. Obviously, I think if you want to go resume comparing, KU should be the number 1 overall seed, and it should not be close. They should have that basically locked up if they win the Big 12. The issue is kind of the numbers, right? What the numbers say. And if you look at someone like Ken Palm or Torvik or any one of these kind of advanced analytics numbers, KU is not the number 1 overall team in the country, right? That's usually Houston or Alabama. I know Purdue and UCLA are up there as well. But the issue is you play games, right, on the basketball court. You don't play them on numbers. And when they play games on a basketball court, KU is really stinking good, and they really don't have a bad loss on the schedule, right? You look at their losses on the road at a ranked K-State team when K-State was playing really well, on the road at a Baylor team that has started to figure it out. And then you lose at home to TCU, which when it's fully healthy would also probably be a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. And then you want to go back to November and talk about Tennessee. Great, cool, they're a top 10 team. So there are no bad losses. And I think you can look at a team like UCLA having some bad losses. I mean, Purdue lost to Northwestern. Are you kidding me? I know they're ranked in the top 25 now, but again, it's different. So I think if you're going to do resume comparing, yes, KU should be the number 1 overall team. But I think if you want to look at the advanced numbers, they probably indicate, hey, maybe 2 or 3 is probably more fair.
I'm right there with you that the resume has to mean something. You play the games for a reason. And I love stats and advanced numbers as much as anybody, but at some point, good wins and a lack of bad losses has to mean something. So that's why I'm with you. I think KU should certainly be one of those 1 or 2 top seeds. And I think KU would prefer to play the regional rounds of the NCAA tournament in Kansas City if they got that choice as well. One final question for Michael Swain from Fog.net before we let him go from this edition of Jayhawk Weekly, brought to you by 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence. There are still a few regular season games left, Michael, in Big 12 play for the Jayhawks. That includes Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock against West Virginia. KU beat West Virginia pretty handily back in Morgantown early on in Big 12 play. West Virginia has been maybe the weirdest team in the Big 12 this year. There are some games where Eric Stevenson looks like an All-American and they look like a top 4 seed. Then there are times where you think maybe they belong in the America East Conference. They just don't even look like they're up to play in the Big 12. Do you think this is another big win for KU on Saturday against the Mountaineers, or is Bob Huggins' team going to keep this one close?
I struggle to think that they'll keep it close, just because it feels like this West Virginia team is like, okay, good performance, bad performance, good performance, bad performance. And, I think they've been maybe on a little bit more of an uptick, last 2 games. So I think this is one that Kansas should win pretty handily. This feels like kind of maybe a classic Allen Fieldhouse game where KU maybe gets off to a good start, but maybe it's close. And then kind of midway through the first half, KU has one of those big runs to pull away and maybe they can control it from there. But no, I think over the next kind of 2 games, we'll see KU get some good wins and maybe have that. It all depends on Texas, right? But maybe that Tuesday senior game is a game when KU could wrap up the Big 12 in terms of just claiming a share of it.
For all the best coverage of the Kansas Jayhawks, head to Fog.net. It's part of the 24/7 Sports Network, and that's where you'll find the work of Michael Swain, KU beat writer for 24/7 and Fog. He joins us every single Tuesday here on 580 Sports Talk for Jayhawk Weekly, brought to you by 23rd Street Brewery. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at mswain247. Michael, as always, man, we appreciate you taking time for us. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next Tuesday afternoon.
Awesome. Sounds great. Talk to you then.
That is Michael Swain from Fog.net. Awesome insight into the white-hot Kansas Jayhawks. We've got to take one more time out on this shortened edition of 580 Sports Talk. We'll come back, wrap up this Tuesday with the final word after this. Wrapping up 580 Sports Talk, a shortened edition of the show on this Tuesday afternoon, and I will get to the Kansas State Wildcats for our final word today. They're coming up tonight, 6 o'clock tip-off, 5 o'clock pregame, so in just a few minutes here on 580 WIBW. K-State, you can still win 3 of your final 4 games, and you might end up with a number 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. And hey, if you went into this year with any sort of expectations for success, I guarantee you a 3 seed in the tournament is beyond your wildest dreams. But a win against Baylor in particular, a Baylor team that I think is Final Four caliber, a team that did just have an extremely embarrassing second half in Lawrence on Saturday afternoon. I think they're prime for the picking, ripe for the picking. I think K-State's got a real good chance to pull off the upset tonight at Bramlage, and we'll have full coverage of it on our website, 580wibw.com, right as the game ends. And of course, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube, 580wibw, as well for Dan's post-game recap show. We'll be back with a full show coming up tomorrow from 3 until 6. So until then, for Dan Lucero, I'm Brendan Dworzinski. This has been 580 Sports Talk.